My name is Elena, and I am a weaver of words, fashioning stories from the comfort of my home office, my fingers tapping rhythmically on the keyboard. But not always to the satisfaction of my husband, Richard, who sees my freelance work as less of a career and more of a casual hobby to be set aside for household chores. It was a mundane Tuesday when I casually slipped into our conversation that a business trip would take me away for a few days. Richard raised an incredulous eyebrow, his stance rigid against the kitchen counter. A business trip? Elena, come on. You just don't want to do the housework, do you? The skepticism in his voice clear as day. I sighed, weary of having this discussion yet again. It's not like that, Richard. There's a conference I've been invited to. It's important for networking. He cut me off with a dismissive wave. Don't talk back, just listen to your husband. Such interactions were becoming the norm, a year into our marriage, and this wasn't how I imagined wedded bliss to be. Richard never truly recognized the effort that went into my writing and treated my freelance status as something insignificant. The irony was, my so-called insignificant work was the pillar of our financial stability. I paid the rent, the bills, and even his occasional luxuries. Yet in his eyes, I was just the housekeeper who filled the empty hours with typing on a computer. His lack of gratitude cut deeper each day, and I was reaching a threshold where silence was no longer an option. The prospect of turning his threatened papers of divorce into my victory lap was becoming more appealing by the second. I managed to keep a calm demeanor, however, and simply nodded, saying, "Okay, Richard, I understand." But as I packed my bags that night, my mind buzzed with thoughts of liberation, not just from the household work, but from a husband who couldn't see the value in what I did or in me. 3 years ago, our paths crossed when an assignment took me to a distant region where local customs and hidden gems awaited discovery. There, I met Richard, a kindred spirit of sorts, working for a competing publishing company. We both thrived on the thrill of uncovering untold stories and sharing them with the world. Our shared goals and zest for reporting brought us together, and tandem trips to investigate various locales evolved into late-night conversations long after the assignments ended. One thing led to another, and 2 years of dating blossomed into a proposal. We skipped the fanfare of a traditional wedding, but seized the symbolism, donning a wedding dress and tuxedo, for a photo shoot that encapsulated our pledge of love in snapshots. Once married, we settled into my spacious condo, roomy enough to host our combined lives with ease. With marriage came contemplation, of dreams, of futures, and for me, the pursuit of a freelance career. The job at my old publishing house offered a safety net, but my heart yearned to go solo. I decided to broach this subject one dinner night a week into our marriage. "Hey, Richard," I began tentatively, "I've been thinking about quitting my job at the publishing house." He put down his fork, staring at me as if I'd announced a trip to the moon. "What? Why would you do that out of the blue? I thought you wanted to grind harder at your career." "Yeah, but I want to try freelancing," I explained. The vision I had for my work life, the freedom I craved, it was all laid bare in my hopeful eyes. "Pfft, freelancing?" His scoff was a harsh note in the midst of our quiet dinner. "You think you can succeed just like that? You're not cut out for this. Focus on being a good wife, Elena, not chasing some fanciful dream." His words stung, an icy slap to my aspirations, but no matter how much I tried to reason with him, his stance was immovable. Each attempt was met with jeers or scathing critique. This didn't deter me. Folding my dreams away wasn't an option. With a heart both heavy and ablaze with resolve, I submitted my resignation at the publishing house, choosing the uncertain path of a freelance reporter. Richard erupted like a shaken soda bottle when he found out. "What the hell, Elena? You can't just make decisions like this without thinking about us." "I have thought it through, Richard. This is my dream," I protested, my voice a mix of apology and defiance. He sneered, tossing down a $1,000 note on the kitchen table. "Fine. From now on, this is what I put into the household. If you can't make ends meet, don't look at me." I locked away his derision and doubts. As the rift between us grew, my determination to prove him wrong grew with it. I was bent on succeeding, on rising above the expectations he so narrowly set for me. Ignorance and mockery from the person who vowed to love and support me ought to have crippled my spirit. but instead it only steeled my resolve to thrive. Richard's refusal to train his eyes on my potential pushed me to find my rhythm as a freelance writer. The days melted into nights, a blur of words and deadlines, pitches and publications. I submitted articles to different magazines and websites, each byline a badge of hard-fought independence. With steady persistence, direct commissions began to trickle in, then a deluge. I started a blog amid these ventures, composing pieces which resonated with readers far and wide. The small following bloomed into a substantial readership, transforming that side gig into a significant source of income. The meager earnings Richard so scorned had blossomed into a cascade, month by month, until I was making triple what I used to as a salaried reporter. But I kept this to myself, fearing Richard's reaction if he knew I surpassed him not only in fulfillment, but in finance. His continued disdain painted a stark contrast to my reality, where my articles were sought after, about, and well received. A year of marriage had done little to soften him. If anything, it only solidified his expectations of me as nothing more than a live-in maid with a writing hobby. And so I maintained this ruse even as his verbal tirades grew hotter and more frequent. One evening, returning from a successful shopping spree funded by my hard-earned cash, his sneer met my eyes as I juggled the bags through the doorway. "That's reckless spending for someone who hardly contributes financially," he spat. The sting brought with it an all-too-familiar sense of indignation. "I work for my money," I retorted, irritated. "This is my reward." He threw a contemptuous look my way, gripping an empty beer can with a tightening fist. "Sure, luxury's on my dime, right?" Before I could even protest, he flung the can at me. By some grace it missed, but the message was clear. My time in this house was coming to a close. As I lay awake that night, the sound of Richard's breathing filled the room, like a metronome ticking off the seconds of our dwindling marriage. His outburst lingered, the scent of spilled beer on my new dress, a pungent reminder of how far we'd strayed from the partners we'd pledged to be. I reflected on the growing divide between us. My career took off, and my spirit soared with each article I penned. But to Richard, I'd become less an equal and more a nuisance, someone who somehow couldn't fulfill the simple duty of being a traditional housewife. My schedule was built around his whims. If I came home past the curfew of his creation or didn't have dinner waiting, his rants would fill the evening. This imbalance couldn't continue. It bred a resentment that gnawed at my heart each day, a crushing sense of isolation paired with these oppressive conditions. Field reporting overnight was forbidden by Richard's decree, as he maintained a bizarre hold on my movements. I adhered to his nonsensical rules, even as they strangled the freedom and spontaneity my job required. I had to keep the peace in our household. Richard worked in an office, adhering to a structure he understood, while I worked with the freedom he envied and perhaps resented. I treaded lightly, not wanting to fan the flames of his insecurity. Yet, amidst this tiptoeing, I continued to build a life for myself with words crafted out of truth and passion. Despite the escalating home tension, my reputation in the freelance world flourished. Demand for my writing surged, and my bank account, a secret I held closely, reflected the fruits of my labor. I carried the financial mantle with ease, a fact unknown to Richard, who languished in his ignorance. I buried the truth deep, wary of his jealousy and knowing full well it would only fuel his disdain. But this facade couldn't last forever. My resilience was waning, and the final straw lay just beyond the horizon. The phone rang, its piercing tone slicing through my concentration. On the other end was a representative from the publishing company that had become a staple in my list of clients. They had an assignment for me, an in-depth feature on the aftermath of an overseas natural disaster. It was an opportunity I couldn't refuse, a story that needed telling, and one that I felt drawn to narrate. But this trip would break Richard's cardinal rule. I wasn't to be away overnight, let alone for an extended period. As I rehearsed my explanation, I could practically hear the combative notes in his reply waiting to be unleashed. When the moment came, his response was as predictable as I'd feared. "A business trip? Are you serious? You're dodging chores now, that's what it is." His eyes bore into me, disbelief and accusation rolled into one hard glare. "It's not like that, Richard," I pleaded. "This is a significant assignment." But he wasn't having it. Instead, he threw absurd assumptions at me, painting me as a deceitful slacker beneath the guise of a hard-working journalist. His words became background noise as a plan began to form in my mind, a way out of this repetitive cycle of accusation and defense. It was during one particularly heated exchange that the proverbial straw snapped. "Know your place, Elena," he fumed, yanking divorce papers out from beneath a stack of unopened bills. "The path you've chosen is a dead end. I've been patient with you, but it's clear you need a wake-up call." The papers lay heavy on the kitchen island, a tangible manifestation of his constant threats. Richard wielded them as leverage, but in that moment I saw them for what they truly were: a release from the prison he had built around me. Determination swelled within me as I reviewed the divorce papers Richard considered an empty threat. But for me, they signified a turning point, a chance to reclaim the narrative of my life. I hastily filled out the paperwork, signed them with a finality that felt like a breath of fresh air, and submitted them to the courthouse. Simultaneously, I arranged to end the lease on the condo that had become a battleground rather than a home. The world awaited, and I wouldn't be tethered any longer. Departing on my business trip, I left no word for Richard, no trail for him to follow. My heart was both heavy and exhilarated as the plane lifted off, soaring high like the newfound control over my life. When I returned from my assignment, a wealth of experiences richer and stories to tell, the confrontation with Richard was unavoidable. The air was tense as I opened my front door. His form loomed large, a shadow against the backdrop of our shared past. "You dare show up after missing for weeks?" Richard's voice erupted, a thunder of outrage and confusion. I had to attend to overseas. I countered with a practiced calm. He laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "Work? You can barely manage local stories. Don't pretend you're someone of importance." I saw in his eyes an unwavering superiority, an obstinacy that rejected the notion of my success. So I laid bare the truth I'd been guarding. "Actually, I've been earning a substantial income, 5 times what you make." His face drained of color, his posture deflating as the reality of the situation settled upon him. And when he lunged forward with fresh divorce papers, I knew my chance had come to reveal my trump card. "Sign these," he demanded, voice trembling. "There's no need. I already filed for divorce 2 weeks ago." I stood tall, feeling the last of my bindings to him unravel. His jaw slackened as understanding dawned upon him. "You filed for divorce? But why?" "Because, Richard, you presented them," I snapped. "You never wanted to be with someone like me, someone ambitious, and now we're free to go our separate ways." "What will I do now?" he stammered, lost. "You'll move out," I answered coldly. "This is my place now." My firm words ushered him out of my life, out of the door, and into the uncertainty he had never contemplated. Shoulders slumped. Richard was finally gone, and with him the heavy shroud of oppressive dominance that had filled our home. In the quiet that settled like a soft blanket over the newly empty space, I could finally breathe. I learned of Richard's struggles through mutual acquaintances, his meager lifestyle, constrained finances, and the unyielding reality of living within one's means. He now resided in a modest apartment, miles away from comfort or excess, a stark contrast to his previous existence. My own journey was a different tale. I had invested in a new condo, a sanctuary for me and my thriving career. The move was seamless, and life had never tasted sweeter. The article on the natural disaster made waves, earning me recognition among my peers and further solidifying my reputation as a freelance journalist of note. The blog, now a cornerstone of my income, flourished with engagement, and I found joy in the interactions with my readers. Each comment, each shared story was a testament to the decision I had made, a leap into authenticity. My days danced with deadlines and drafts. I thrived in the exciting chaos of freelance work. No longer bound by Richard's restrictions, I accepted assignments that resonated with my interests and passion. The stories called out to be told, and I was their willing scribe, penning narratives that connected, educated, and stirred the heart. And in this sunlit room, surrounded by my words and the peace that had eluded me for so long, I knew that this, freedom, fulfillment, the power of my own voice, was where I should have been all along. I wrote on, dedicated to the craft, newly alive to the possibility that my work, my dream, was not only viable but vital and entirely mine to shape.